Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you virtually. We are the SCC Field Project team, and we're excited to be here today. So when we began this project, we knew how important it is to have a workforce training programs that connect people to meaningful work, and now more than ever, it's essential. So we began our project research by thinking about the connections between workforce development and construction retrofits because our client, SCC, was interested in seeing if they could connect their job matching program with the need to equip buildings in their housing portfolio with retrofits. And we're going to be talking about that today. So I'm Becky Eidelman. It's nice to meet you.
Julia Doherty.
Bernier Dale.
Megan Tenhoff.
Edie Wassam.
And the agenda for today, I'll be pretty brief about it. First, we're going to talk about SCC as a community development corporation. Then we'll talk about our project goals and key topic areas. Next, we're going to go into the context, so Somerville and the local political environments. Then we can discuss our research methodology, which includes a literature review, a retrofit analysis, a landscape analysis, and interviews. And last, we'll conclude with analysis and recommendations. Here we have some members of the Somerville Community Corporation with the Somerville Mayor, Joe Curtoni. So SCC is a membership-based organization, which means that folks who join its committees really have a role in the direction of the organization. They manage a portfolio of homes, like I mentioned earlier, that they rent to folks who are low income or who meet the area median income requirements between 30 to 110%. And they've been in operation for over 50 years. They're the only CDC in Somerville. And they've used community preservation acts to buy property, removing it from the speculative housing market, and then renting it affordably. They also operate a job training database, the First Source Jobs program. And based on our conversations with SCC, we know that over half of SCC's job seekers are foreign-born, more than half are non-native English speakers, and 10% have not completed high school.
Our project goals guided our research questions into 4 intersecting themes. First is job training. Using case studies, what are the characteristics of a successful green jobs training program in retrofits? A retrofit is upgrading a building to make it more energy efficient and demand less energy. We'll get into specifics later. 2, retrofits to buildings. What type of energy retrofits would provide the greatest reduction in energy for SCC and which would support climate resiliency in their housing stock? 3, program partnerships. Who should SCC consider as a key stakeholder, potential partners, competitors, or even funders if they decide to develop a green jobs training program? And 4, career pathways. Who is SCC's target population for a building retrofit training program? And what are their potential employment outcomes, short and long term?
So Somerville is the most densely populated city in Massachusetts with over 8,000 homes within only 4.1 square miles. Its housing stock is also pretty old, with 88% of its housing stock being built before 1980 and a significant portion of that being built before 1940. They've also seen a pretty rapid increase in population over the last decade. So displacement is also a large concern, and Somerville's housing market is experiencing a lot of speculative buying. So people at risk of being priced out of neighborhoods or who work in Somerville but can't find market rate housing rely on SCC's 100 Homes program. So in the realm of climate, Somerville has been very active to work to address climate change. It recently released its Summer Vision Plan, which aims for Somerville to become carbon neutral by 2050. And part of this is through energy efficiency measures. So our model of job training is based on ideas from the Green New Deal, which proposes connecting environmental action with workforce needs. And our report will provide SCC with a centralized repository of information about models for job training programs, what's currently happening in the sector, what the political and municipal landscape is like, and help them, all this information will help them consider next steps.
SCC sought to learn if a green jobs training program and the desire to increase the climate resilience of its housing stock could somehow support one another. Both green jobs training and energy efficiency are wide and broad. After some preliminary research, we narrowed the field of green job careers to ones that would be attainable for SCC's client population, which dovetailed with appropriate building retrofits for Somerville's housing stock. This helped to inform our methods.
We decided to take a qualitative approach to our field projects report. So we spent the beginning of the semester conducting lit review, digging through online journals and different websites, for example, of existing similar job training programs to learn about what had worked and what hadn't worked. We also did a retrofit review to understand the different types of retrofits that can be undertaken in a house to weatherize it, and which of these retrofits make the most sense for Somerville's housing stock. We then delved into a landscape analysis to understand what's already going on in the job training and retrofit space in the Boston region. We wanted to answer questions like, do training programs for retrofits already exist in the region? Is teaching people retrofit skills the right place to focus our energy right now? Will there be jobs for them when they finish their training? Will landlords and homeowners continue to undertake retrofits in their properties? And how will city or state funding or legislation in Massachusetts impact this demand for retrofits? And in the last few weeks, we got to the fun part, which was conducting our interviews. We managed to conduct 15 different interviews with various people, including folks from the city of Somerville, a trainer at an existing job training program, people at various state and state affiliated agencies working in both workforce development and in clean energy, people who do the labor of the physical retrofits themselves. And finally, we came together over Zoom to hash out a few different recommendations based on what we had learned in our interviews and how that tied into what we had learned in our lit review and our landscape analysis. Now, as we'll talk about later, the recommendations that we'll deliver to SCC consist of two parts. First, what sort of retrofits they should take in their affordable housing properties. And second, recommendations for workforce development and building a job training program.
In terms of retrofits, we kind of divided them up into 5 or so categories, some of which do have overlap. The first one we looked at was envelope measures, which focus on insulating, sealing, and waterproofing the exterior walls, roof, and foundation of a building. This does include more expensive projects like insulation, but then also some more simple, less expensive ones like caulking and weather stripping projects, which can be used to close gaps between the windows and doors or walls of the house. We looked at high efficiency heating and cooling equipment, which is important because it uses less energy. And from research on previous retrofits, we found that mini splits are a pretty popular product in terms of that because they're pretty easy to install since they don't require ductwork. They're also more cost effective than window air unit air conditioners, and baseboard electric heating. The next category we looked at was Energy Star qualified appliances, which include high efficiency lighting fixtures, dishwashers, washing machines, as well as also heating and cooling equipment and a few other appliances that are similar. We looked at renewable energy options, which mostly ended up including solar panels, which SCC has already been adding to some of its properties. And then lastly, we looked at vegetative roofs, which are exactly what they sound like. They're having plants on the roof and getting the benefits of having plants on the roof. And then some of our key takeaways that we found after doing the retrofit research was that were applicable to SCC's housing stock were related to the fact that Somerville is in a cold climate. So envelope measures we found kind of across the board to be the most important in terms of energy efficiency. And this is because in New England, we do have such variable temperatures. So it can get really hot and really cold. So we often have either the AC or heating on, and we don't want the air to leak out. The other thing we found was that SCC should definitely use Mass Save as a resource for energy audits. because they can give customized assessments for each property. Since not all homes are the same, it's important to kind of point out in each property what to prioritize and focus on, and where the gaps where air sealing is needed are. And lastly, we found that tenants should actually be very involved in both the planning, the construction process, and post-construction. This is because they're the ones that, they know the house very well. They may need to vacate during the construction process. And then after the fact, if they get a new retrofit like a smart thermostat, they do need to know how to use it in order for it to be as efficient as possible.
So in addition to these retrofit takeaways, we also found some ways in the workforce development realm. First, we learned that partnership is crucial. None of the examples we looked at did their job training program solo. Second, a job training program needs significant startup funding, often requiring a mix of state, federal, and other funding sources. Third, training should be tailored to the unique needs and strengths of a place, and not just copy another training program. You really need to understand the market where you're located. Fourth, many successful job training programs we saw were in response to initiatives by the state or local governments to incentivize retrofitting homes. That government support is really key. Another takeaway is that people undergoing the training, which can sometimes be months long, want to know that there's sufficient demand from employers that they'll get a job at the end of it, and that they won't have to get retrained for another career once demand for retrofits fizzled out. And finally, we learned that wraparound career supports like intake assessments, career counseling, applicant screening, job matching is really important because many times participants are dealing with other challenges in their lives and could use these additional supports.
So there are a number of funding opportunities both for a job training program and for conducting retrofits. On the workforce development side, one of the major components is the City of Somerville's Job Creation Retention Trust, which oversees the job linkage fee, which passed in 2017 as an amendment to zoning, that collects $2.58 per square foot of commercial development beyond 15,000 square feet. And then the funds are used for job creation and job training programs. So another possible source is Mass Hire, which oversees workforce investment boards throughout the state. And Mass Hire awards funds by individual participants as opposed to a lump sum. There's also the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, which is a federal policy that oversees individual training accounts, which award up to $6,000 per participant, and $8,000 of training includes an ESL component. There are also employer partnerships that SEC would be forming, where it might be that a potential employer would sponsor a participant in exchange for a guaranteed placement. So on the retrofit side, there are two major funding sources for retrofits, which are Mass Save and LEAN, which is the Low-Income Energy Affordability Network. So Mass Save provides no-cost energy audits and then rebates and incentives based on those findings. They also provide 0% interest loans for certain projects. For LEAN, this would be relevant to their multifamily affordable housing retrofit program, which is for buildings with upwards of 5 units. In this case, LEAN conducts its own energy assessment and then works with the whole building and conducts the retrofit from beginning to end to bring it up to a certain standard at low to no cost to the building owner. There's also other services through organizations like LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, which does grants that are for resiliency planning and assessment, which are other things that SEC could utilize. There are also challenges associated with some of these funding sources, so it would be necessary to scale up to apply for a lot of grants. Also, there would be competition not just for funding, but also possibly for trainers to staff this program. As for federal funding, it's only possible to receive funding on a per participant basis, as opposed to in sort of upfront funding sources.
Understanding certifications is a key part of a successful training program. Fortunately, most of the employment opportunities that we researched didn't require certifications for entry-level roles. However, there was conflicting information about which certifications and trainings were needed for career advancement. Also, English fluency wasn't always necessary. In fact, other languages are a plus. It's also possible to learn air sealing and installation in one day on the job. And last, OSHA 10 and other industry recognized online training programs are easily attainable with computer access. If SCC wishes to embark on a program like this, they must be clear with potential trainees so that they can make informed decisions to decide if this program would be best for them. Retrofit work is physically demanding. You get exposure to extreme temperatures, heavy equipment is heavy, and you work in small spaces. There's occupational hazards. Working on ladders all day, exposure to lead, asbestos, pests, and industrial chemicals. Training is also presented in English. Trainees need math skills and some basic understanding of physics. Though some organizations are actively trying to hire diverse candidates, there may be discrimination on the part of employers and customers. Trainees should be made aware. And last, this career path may not be accessible for some. Some employers require a passing of a background check and a drug test. Mass, Save, and Lean work with a list of approved contractors, which have better pay, but also established relationships within the field, a glass door of sorts. To grow in the career, people would need a driver's license, a good driving record, internet access, and a computer to continue certifications from home.
Next, we have an analysis of what the career pathways might look like for a job training in energy efficiency. We know that career advancement is possible without a high school or post-secondary credential. And we know that jobs in this sector do pay a higher wage than other non-energy sector work. Brookings' report on advancing inclusion found that work in the clean energy sector could earn somebody between 8 and 19% more than that average national earnings. And despite the current economic conditions, demand for construction workers remains high. An E2 report concluded that Massachusetts is among the top 10 states with the highest growth in the energy efficiency and clean energy sectors. And in Massachusetts, energy efficiency comprises 22% of all construction jobs and 47% of all energy sector jobs. Construction firms are also concerned about worker shortages as construction employment sank by 25% between 2006 and 2010. And while there is demand in the energy efficiency construction sector, workers may experience barriers. Some of the aforementioned ones include language barriers. But we also know that there's not a lot of data on undocumented workers. The National Skills Coalition reports that only 1.5% of adult participants receiving WIOA training were limited English proficient. There's also a high attrition rate for a lot of programs, which is why the pre-screening process is so important. It's something that SCC could help with. And then lastly, there are barriers to accessing the training that need to be addressed with wraparound services like childcare or transportation.
As seen on this map, we found that there's actually a gap in training programs for retrofit skills in the Somerville vicinity. So if someone lives in the Somerville region and they want to get trained for a job for retrofits, they have to either go out to Framingham or commute to Roxbury. And so this, in combination with the fact that the cities of Somerville and Boston and others are collaborating on their climate action plans towards carbon neutrality in 2050, this means that SCC has an opportunity to fill this needed gap. But we do predict there'll be some challenges to fill that gap. First, there's just limited physical space in densely packed Somerville for a suitable training facility. You really need a warehouse-sized space to teach people construction skills, which are involved in retrofitting. And second, there are limited training programs, and so SCC might have to compete for finding experienced teachers and trainers to lead a training should they pursue it.
And some of the next steps that we recommend for SCC, we believe that they should definitely get massive energy audits. They're no risk, it doesn't cost anything, and it's just very good for information gathering. We think that they should definitely partner with existing training programs that complement their strengths, which are community outreach, recruitment, and wraparound services. They should definitely conduct a feasibility study as well to see how it can bring its resources together to potentially create a job training program, or if they should be used if otherwise. And finally, we want to thank you all for watching our presentation. And we have a few acknowledgements, just kind of a thank you to our teaching team, our partners at SEC, and our classmates as well. And we're happy to answer any of your questions live.